Hey, welcome back. So this section is called Functions Part 2. It's much smaller and more focused than the original Functions section, which kind of covered a ton of material, was longer, and more sprawling. This is going to be more concise and focused on just a couple of new topics. So let's start with our objectives, like always. Just two this time. First, we want to use the star and double star operator as parameters to a function and outside of a function. So that may not make any sense whatsoever at this point, but we'll get there. And then we also want to leverage dictionary and tuple unpacking to create more flexible functions. So earlier, I think a section ago, I mentioned we'll learn more about dictionary unpacking. Well, we're learning about it in this section. Let's start though in this video by talking about the single star operator and what it means in regards to functions and parameters. Often called star args, it's just a special operator we can pass to our functions as a parameter, and it will gather all remaining arguments as a tuple. So just a single parameter, we can call it whatever we want as long as it starts with a star. So I'll show you, some other names you could use, but the standard name is star args, but it's not the only way you can use it. So what has to be there is the star, and then what comes after args is conventional, but we can talk about some other options. So to reiterate what it does, we have a function definition. If we put star args as a parameter, it will collect any number of additional or extra arguments that have been passed into a single parameter called args, or whatever we name this. So it's always good to look at an example to help illustrate what I'm talking about, make it a bit less abstract. Let's say we wanted to define a function called sum all nums. And with what we know right now, we could hard code in num1, num2, num3, as many as we wanted. And in here, if we just wanted to return the sum, it would be return num1 plus num2 plus num3 and so on. And we would call it by doing sum all nums, and then I would pass in, let's say 4, 6, and 9. And we would expect to get 19 back. Let's just verify that that works. Oh, well, we're not printing anything out. Try that again. Okay, we get 19. So that should all be review. But what's different, or what I want to be different about this function, is I want to be able to pass in any number of numbers after this and have them all be added together. And to do that with what we know right now, I would have to define another parameter called num4 and another one called num5. How many do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I'm just going to delete those and just go down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we could do this, but then there's a limitation. We'd also need to fix this, right? Do num4 plus num5. But what if I only passed in 4 and 6? And yeah, I guess technically we could do this and give them default values of 0 so that we're adding 0 onto the end if only 2 of them are passed in. And that's sort of a hacky workaround, but it still doesn't work if we want to pass in 10 arguments instead of 5. So this is where star args comes in. I'm going to get rid of all of this, everything actually, and I'm just going to write a single parameter called star args. And again, this could be anything, star nums. I'm going to call it args, so that's standard. And inside of here, let's just start by printing args. So we refer to the parameter without the star inside the function. It's just that we need the star in the function definition. So I should print args, and let's just see what we get. You can see this is a tuple right here, and also right here. So args is a tuple containing all of the arguments that we pass in. In this case, all of them. So if we wanted to make sum all nums work using this, we just need to iterate through the tuple. So that will just be for num in args. And let's make a total variable. Total is equal to 0. And then we'll just do total plus equals num. And then at the end, we will return num, or total, excuse me. So this also is very similar to what we've seen before, except now, rather than passing in a list, these are all individual arguments. And this code works with 2 arguments, with 20, or with 100 numbers passed in. Let's see if it works. We get 33 and 10. So this should be 33 and that should be 10. It's working. it's worth pointing out that we can pass in other parameters. So I could have num1 comma star args, and we can print num1. Just to show you that, in this case, it doesn't really make sense when we're summing all the numbers together. They're all the same at the end of the day. But we can still have individual parameters that are named and then have our star args afterwards. So if we run this now, we get 4 and 4, and then 29 and 6. And the addition is different because we're no longer adding in 4, because we're just pulling 4 and printing it, and then looping through the rest. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. Let's get rid of this and go back to our initial version. The example is also in the slides if you want to take a look. And I have another example in the slides. It's called ensure correct info, and I use star args again. And I'll also show after this that this doesn't have to be named args. All it does is it checks if colt is in args and steal is in args. Remember, args is a tuple. So it's checking if that tuple contains, it means if any arguments were passed that were colt and steal. If both of them were passed in, like in this case, we'll return welcome back colt. Otherwise, we're just going to return not sure who you are. So the effect of this one is we can pass in as many arguments as we want, but there has to be colt and there has to be steal in there somewhere in order to print this or return this. Any other arguments in there, if they don't contain these two, then we just return not sure who you are. So I have the same code just copied over to a file, and I'm just going to print args up top, and let's run it twice. So this time there's no arguments being passed in, and this time there are 4 arguments all in the args tuple. And you can see the first time it's an empty tuple, second time it has these 4 items. So now rather than just printing, let's look at what we get by printing the result of executing, printing the return value. And rather than just passing in nothing, let's do hello and false, and how about 78? What do we expect? Well, args will this time contain 3 items, but it doesn't contain colt or steal, and we have to have both of those in order to return welcome back colt. Also notice we don't need an else here. This is that whole short-circuiting thing where if you use a return statement in a conditional, you don't have to use an else, because the only way to get here is for this to be false, because this return will quit out. But let's try it. We get not sure who you are and welcome back colt. Okay, last thing I'll mention, we can change this. Actually, I'm going to go over to sum, and instead of star args, we can call it nums. And then we just change this for num and nums. So the star has to be there, but otherwise it doesn't have to be called args. Let's just make sure it still works. So that was called sum. Still looks good. Cool.